my mission, I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.
Listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHH-LP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Good morning, everybody. And Harry, good morning to you, the station manager for WNHH. And I just always like to shout out that people don't understand that to do this show, to run a radio station, there are people behind the scenes, people off stage, and you also have your own show. But nonetheless, I like to give public accolades to the expertise that you show and demonstrate to allow the WNHH. Quite frankly, everybody, we may be perceived to be a small station, but our audience has been growing exponentially for the last 5 years across the globe. And that's really, I think, a testimony to the talent in New Haven, the ability for folks to work together in spite of what we might hear sometimes off the record. And just to kind of become uniform and to create a unity moving forward. Our guest today is Dr. Nancy J. Brown, Dean of the Yale School of Medicine. And I was mentioning to Dr. Brown that I was a little hesitant and anxious about the show this morning, because tomorrow, I'm very anxious about tomorrow. But then when I reflected on the fact that perhaps tomorrow is really health, you can talk about other issues in terms of the political campaign, but I think health is a dominating thing, the health of the globe, health of the nation, health of the country, your own health. And not to let politics get in the way. So, Dean Brown, I'm really glad to have you on the show this morning, because you're a healing balm, and this topic will allow me to be a little bit more relaxed. Speaking of healing balms, we have two Yale cultural ambassadors to the Yale Clinical Research Program, Reverend Dr. Leroy Perry Jr. and Reverend Alvin Clayton are also joining. And there are some other people who you might see in the boxes that might decide to speak, but I won't pick on them at this particular moment. So Dean Brown, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
As folks might not know, you just joined us earlier this year in February, and then you're plunged into this COVID, and then now the flu, and now just whatever the future might be. So to be the Dean of the Yale Medical School, and I have to say, that people may or may not know that the medical school has been around for over 200 years, 216, 217 years, and they've never had a female dean except for the lady that you're looking at right now. Whether that's noteworthy or historical, that's for you to decide, but it is a demographic fact. So Dean Brown, welcome. We talked about the topic of today's show being taking charge of your health, a conversation really pertaining to community health, clinical care, and the Yale School of Medicine. Dr. Brown, I have literally 100 questions that I could pose to you, but I'm not sure even where to start. You're a person that could be given the keynote address to the NAACP, the keynote address to the Congressional Black Caucus, the keynote address to the Urban League, you're the keynote address to the American Medical Association. So I'm really not even sure where to start on this. Again, the general topic is taking charge of your health. So I'm going to just throw that at you and allow you to kind of weigh in about what might be on your heart, mind, and soul. And then I might ask a few specific questions, and our co-hosts, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, will certainly chip in as well. So welcome.
Thank you. Well, that's quite an introduction. So let me share a little bit about my personal history. I was actually an undergraduate here in New Haven and graduated, I'm embarrassed to say, a long time ago, 1981. And went to medical school in Boston, but spent most of my career at Vanderbilt in Nashville. And when this job came open, one of the things that attracted me to being Dean of Yale School of Medicine is the community in which we live. And I had lived in town as an undergraduate and really loved New Haven, and it was really an honor to come back. Since early after I came, I arrived February 1st, so I had about a month before COVID hit. And during that month, we had a celebration of the cultural ambassadors. We had the FDA here And I got to meet Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and many others. And what a gem. I really hadn't known the extent to which we had this partnership with our community. And so as I think about the school, we do cutting edge science, we educate future physicians, and we have an opportunity to, I think, change medicine and change how we affect the health of so many people. In this country, we have groups of people who are who do not receive as good a health care and who suffer disproportionately from specific diseases. One of them is high blood pressure, which is something that I've studied throughout my career. We've seen the same thing during the COVID pandemic, and we have a lot of work to do. So I'm really excited to be here and with such great partners.
Well, we're excited to kind of have this opportunity to be with you. And again, this information that in terms of our show, we sent it out to a variety of platforms for people to really understand the history makers that are taking place, history that we're making here in New Haven and at Yale and in the community and across the globe. On that note, Dean Brown, I wanted to share with us, I think people do, but maybe they don't. What I'm trying to get to is penicillin. Where was penicillin first administered? What hospital in the United States? Where was it first administered?
Well, that's a setup. Tisha, do you want to answer that? I think it's pretty close to home.
Yes, that would be here at Yale. We are the home of many firsts. So penicillin, also we did some of the early pediatric diabetes insulin pump studies here at Yale. And so we're thrilled to be an institution of first. I think additionally, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton will tell you, I think we're one of the first partnerships in the country to really focus on clinical trials diversity in this way. And I think that's one of the reasons why the FDA Office of Minority Health and Health Equity have been so interested in our partnership and form the MOU, is because we're really focused on this innovation. But I think through this partnership, a really exciting piece of that is not just having the innovations happen here in the ivory tower, but getting them out to the community, which I think is the most exciting part of this partnership. Excellent.
Dean Brown, would you like to elaborate on that?
Well, I think the example of penicillin is a really good one because, often discoveries are made serendipitously, like that there's something that derived from a mold that can protect, and so there's a lot of research that goes on here that seems unrelated to much, but what is exciting is when you have somebody who understands clinical medicine and understands the value of those discoveries and understands how to develop new drugs. That's in part by a group of faculty we refer to as physician scientists. They're people who both practice medicine clinically and who also spend time in the lab. And it's a really unique group of people because their research is informed by what they see in the hospital. And their care of patients is also better because they're scientists, I think. And I think it's one of the unique things about having a teaching hospital. And it's a group of faculty in whom I'd particularly like to invest and develop over the next several years.
And Dean Brown, you referenced earlier the phrase changing medicine. We're in this political campaign. I guess we're at the accustom ourselves and adjust to the fact that we're going to be bombarded with messages throughout the media for the rest of our lifetime. But what is changing the medicine from your standpoint? What vision are you lifting up? I'm trying for people to really just be hopeful for the future and also know that there are people that are concerned with visioning, but also practical visioning. So when you use the phrase changing medicine, what does that connote to you?
Yeah, I think to me, part of it is about empowering our patients and helping people become engaged in their own healthcare. And, traditionally medicine was, paternalistic in some ways where we trained physicians who thought they knew the right thing for our patients, and we told patients information, and we expected them to do what we said. I think those days are long over, and each of us is responsible for our own health. So now the role of a physician is really more of a partner and an educator. And I think one of the things that I've been excited about with the cultural ambassadors is the extent to which education is happening in the community, whether it's the need to get the flu vaccine or the need to keep your blood pressure controlled. That's really important work. It's a different model of medicine. It's not that the patient goes to the doctor and that's where medicine happens. It's more about medicine going out into the community and bringing information to our community.
Excellent. Reverend Perry, Dean Brown has kind of set you up very nicely there to kind of comment and elaborate, and Reverend Clayton. But even if she hadn't set you up, I was going to set you up because I don't think we can mention enough that this change that Dean Brown has just indicated in the role of the cultural ambassadors. Reverend Perry, are you muted?
Yep, I'm unmuted now.
Okay.
I think that I think Dean Brown is bringing to us something that is that may have been lacking earlier in terms of diversity. She spent a lot of time on a mission statement that included all of us, that deals with diversity. And that is so important, I think, in medicine, so that you don't have this paternalistic look, but that you have an inclusive look, and your participants are part of their own healing, like in the wounded healer. So I appreciate that. And not only that, Dean Brown, Nancy, as she wants me to call her, is really interested in our views in the community of where we think medicine should go. And I think that that's a new approach, when you can look at the people and say, no, this is for you, but you have the people saying, no, this is what we're looking for. And so we've talked to her on a number of innovative things that are about to happen in our communities. One of the things that we talked to her about was a passageway where we can get more young people involved in the study of medicine early on. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that we will have more Black doctors and medical practitioners. I think that's something that's been lacking, but it is of great concern to us. And she's just doing some marvelous things, but she did with Marcella and Marcella Nunez, promoting her in terms of the Office of Equity. I mean, it's just awesome. I just can't wait to see what's going to happen tomorrow, Dean.
Well, many of us can't wait. The Globe cannot wait to see what's going to happen tomorrow. But as we say, it's on tomorrow after 8 o'clock, or hopefully when the results are in, because regardless of what takes place tomorrow, the struggle still continues. And I really appreciate that. And we'll have Dr. Marcella Nunez-Smith, as well as another person on the show next Monday to kind of continue the momentum. Reverend Clayton, any comments to kind of amplify what Dean Brown and Reverend Perry have mentioned?
Yes. Dean Brown instituted a town hall meeting with the ambassadors, the staff, the medical staff. I'm muted, can you hear me?
Oh, you're good, you're good.
The medical staff, people of the community, and this was weekly, dealing early on when coronavirus hit us. This was a weekly town hall meeting with doctors, nurses, YCCI, the ambassadors, and we talked about the things that we thought was necessary and the things that were needed in the community. At that time, there was a shortage of masks, and we got masks. There was a shortage of gloves. We anything that we needed. This dean was in the forefront of making sure that we got these items to the community. And so, with that being said, she's more than just a dean afar. she's the dean with the friendly spirit that's willing to listen to the voices of the community and the staff.
Dean Brown, I've heard of some doctors accepting samples of medicine to kind of promote. Did you pay these two gentlemen to?
I'm thinking what I might owe them. I also want to say, you know, one of the things about being in these roles is that sometimes you're given credit for the work of others. And I want to make sure that I give a shout out to Tisha Johnson, who really has helped to organize this. And also, you know, we're also partnered with Yale New Haven Health System, who was very helpful in securing masks, for example. So many people stepping in. And to me, that has been one of the most exciting things about COVID is when confronted with a common enemy, we all rolled up our sleeves. And I think it should be a model for us as we think about other common enemies, whether it's, you know, the opioid epidemic or common illnesses like diabetes and hypertension. We can learn from what we've been doing in the last several months and start to apply that going forward.
Let's talk about hypertension a little bit. And just as a point of personal transparency, I think I was in the doctor's last week and he reminded me of the need to kind of get it under control. But before we do, Dean Brown, I was looking at some of your bios and I don't want to, we hear so often that there still is a patriarchy, matriarchy, male dominance, et cetera. And sometimes I think it just goes over people's heads. But in terms of your bio, in 2016, you were admitted to something called the Round Table, and the first woman elected since 1884. I'm not trying to embarrass you, but I think it's just important. Sometimes we just take for granted we've made a lot of strides, but on the other hand, we still have, who knows how far we still have to be conscious and diligent. So what is that? The Round Table, the first woman elected to it, and it was founded in 1884.
Yeah, so Nashville has some organizations that my husband refers to as old men speechifying clubs. And so I was inducted as the first woman. And I'll tell you that one of the other members is a physician named Andre Churchwell, who is the brother of Keith Churchwell, our own Yale New Haven Hospital, Keith Churchwell. But it's a group that met for dinner and a paper. So each of us would rotate and give a paper on a topic. And it's of course not meeting right now during COVID, but it does give me the hope that I can zoom into a meeting from time to time if we meet online.
Before we go to hypertension, Dean Brown, and I appreciate, and I think your answer illustrates. And we've just met, but we really even haven't met. We're just laid eyes on one another. But I think people can sense your kindness, your transparency, and your diplomacy. Why were there no women elected prior? Why were you? What made it distinct? Your selection. Why were you the first?
Well, you know, it's an interesting question why there were no women elected previously. And I was, you know, it's funny, I have been elected to various national organizations. This was a local organization, and yet I understood that it was a big deal for this organization to make the decision to start to include women. And among the various accolades I've had in my career, it was one that meant the most to me. So it's interesting that you asked about it.
Okay, I won't ask a follow-up, but I appreciate your hesitance to, and we'll have a drink. We'll have a drink together.
Okay.
We'll have a drink. I won't record it. But let's talk about hypertension, because people hear, you know, bad blood, hypertension, this medication, that medication. I'm on it. I'm off it. Sugar. You've devoted a lot of your career to this issue.
Yes, I have spent my research career studying high blood pressure. You know, it's interesting. It's only been, you know, a little over 100 years that we've been able to measure blood pressure. And when we first measured it, you know, I mean, when you felt the pulse, people thought higher was better. And then, you know, we started to appreciate in the mid 20th century that high blood pressure was a risk factor for lots of things, but in particular for stroke, heart disease, and for kidney disease, and ending in end-stage kidney disease and dialysis. And for many people, there are no symptoms associated with high blood pressure. So in the 1970s, for example, there was a big public health campaign that talked about the silent killer. We have now really good medicines to help reduce blood pressure with few side effects, and they also have been shown to extend people's lives. Interestingly, you know, high blood pressure is not a single disease. It's really many inherited factors and environmental factors. Environmental factors include things like salt intake. And there's this interaction between genetic factors and environmental factors. So not everybody's blood pressure goes up when they eat salt, but some people's do. And so if you can figure out which of those people it is, you can target the right medicine. So we've spent a lot of time studying how do you target the right medicines, and how do certain medicines reduce risk more than others, and can we use those better?
Any suggestions for people that are listening in terms of how they should monitor it in terms of our initial theme for this show of taking charge of your health?
Yeah.
Any suggestions in
So
that regard?
absolutely. I mean, nowadays, so there are lots of ways to monitor your own blood pressure. You know, many stores have a little stand where you can go and measure your blood pressure. And they may not be quite as accurate as other things, but they're good enough to know whether you have high blood pressure. And in general, you know, the exact number that we're aiming for changes, but I would say you want it to be below 135 on the top and below 85 on the bottom. And then, you know, when I have patients who have high blood pressure, I recommend that they get a cuff, which you can buy at a pharmacy, and they become less expensive. But again, you can also go to a firehouse. Most firemen are bored. They're not putting out fires, and they're all trained as EMTs and whatnot, and they're happy to measure blood pressure for you. So those are some ways to keep track of your numbers. And if they're high, then it's best to seek some help.
Excellent. Tisha and Dean Brown, maybe let's just share again, because in the news, well, everybody might not be as much of a news junkie, a news consumer as I am, but certainly, and I do a lot of Google searches on news topics such as clinical trials, such as people resistance to that. Talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of the clinical trials and the research, because regardless of your thoughts or view, I think the educational paradigm is really important. Same way with penicillin and the other medical interventions you've mentioned. Unless people are participating in these new medical discoveries, things might not just be a great beneficial outcome for all. So Dean Brown and Tisha, maybe share a little bit about clinical research and clinical trials as we move forward. And sometimes it's not as invasive as people might think. I know, Reverend Perry, you are participating in a clinical trial, and I'd like to hear your comments on that, and Reverend Clayton as well.
So thank you for asking, and I'll take a crack at it, and then Tisha and others can step in. But you know, just as I was talking about high blood pressure drugs, we know that different people respond differently to medicines. And so it's really important that we develop medicines and therapies in as diverse a group as possible, and in particular in the patients who are likely to use them. And that has not always been the case. You know, when I started my research career, studies were often done in not only in white men, but in the researchers themselves, right? You know, people kind of volunteered for their own studies, and we started to appreciate that then we would roll these drugs out for use, and we had unexpected consequences, and we really needed to make sure that we were studying them appropriately. It's a matter of building trust, because we also have a history of some pretty awful experiences in this country, like the Tuskegee syphilis trial, for example. And so I think our ethical understanding of how to conduct clinical research has evolved enormously over the last 40 years. And so to be both inclusive and safe and fair is the goal here. And we can't do that without a partnership. So I think probably the Reverends Perry and Clayton are more articulate about this than anybody else I know. And so maybe they should talk about the importance of participation in clinical research.
Reverend Perry? Unmute yourself, please.
I was waiting on Tisha.
Oh, okay. Ladies first, Tisha, ladies first.
So thank you, Reverend Perry. So it is so important to have diverse participation in clinical trials. I think it's one of the probably the most compelling arguments I had over 10 years ago when I met with Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, who fully today admit that they had no intention of spending time with me after the first meeting. But I think just the understanding that the vast majority of clinical trials, even today, are still don't have diverse participation, even when there is a disproportionate disease burden. And so one of the messages that we've been trying to get out as the ambassadors over the past 10 years is it's just important to understand that participation in clinical trials is how we learn. That if we don't have diverse populations participating in the clinical trials, it's impossible to know that the drugs or device or therapies are effective in all populations. It's impossible to know whether there's different side effects in those populations. And so the only way we can get this information is through clinical trials. And, you know, Tom, you mentioned this idea of there's different kinds of clinical trials. And I think that those are common misperceptions. We've talked about a few of those on the show, but not all of our clinical trials involve taking a medicine or having something implanted or having a blood draw. We have lots of kinds of clinical research activities. Some could just involve, being a part of a survey. Others could be involving, devices or therapeutics, as we've been talking about, as an example, the hypertension or the COVID clinical trials. And I think the other, Dean Brown mentioned, the past past issues in clinical research like Tuskegee and other things. But I think one of the important things that we've also addressed on your show in the past, like with our directors of human subject protection, Linda Coleman and Madeline Baranowski, is our regulatory framework has come a long way as well, and making sure that as there are these issues in clinical research, the regulations have caught up with them, and that there is an extensive regulatory process and ethical framework to make sure that everyone's protected. And lastly, I would say, before I turn it over to Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton, a really important part of the protections process is not only this partnership, but the individual themselves, getting the information, having the knowledge to understand really what's involved in the clinical research, getting all of the answers, asking the questions as a participant, so that you're really taking charge in that way of saying, I'd like more information about this clinical study. I'd like to understand what's really being studied. I like to, for the ambassadors, it's even understanding who the researchers are, so that they really feel like in bringing information to the community that they have all of the information themselves. And I think that's one of the most special things I'd say about this partnership is really addressing that issue of diversity within clinical trials through education and through awareness, community awareness.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that it's not just minority people that may have an aversion to clinical research. I mean, I've asked some other people about taking the vaccine that were not members of my particular racial community, and I got the same kind of response. The problem, however, is that our community is disproportionately affected. So it's more important for us to make that pitch to them. And so in order to do that, there has to be some levels of trust but also it also has to be some level of outreach in order for us to because people are not going to open up just to everyone who may ask them about a clinical trial. But if they trust the persons who are coming to them, and it's even better if you can say, I know people, or I'm one of the participants, it helps in the conversation. Mm-hmm. So education is fundamental. We have to understand what it is we're asking people to do so that when they ask us questions about it, we can give them the correct answers. And then number two, we have to build a relationship. And I think that's what Yale is doing through the clinical ambassadors, is building a relationship in the community that says, we care about your health. We know you have to take charge of it, but we are here to help you because we know it's important, because you may be disproportionately affected by outcomes if you fail to take this or do this research. So I think that's important. And that's what Reverend Clayton and I and the rest of our cultural ambassadors do in our communities. We sit down with researchers, we sit down with the doctors who are in charge of these projects. We ask all the questions that we can ask. When we don't know, we refer back to them, and our community people back to them to get the correct answers. And I think that that's the way we build this bridge, and that's the way we're going to change the outcomes that are going to have tremendous effects in terms of our achieving better outcomes.
Indeed, indeed. Reverend Clayton?
I think Tisha and Dr. Perry covered that so nicely.
All right.
I mean, they covered it like a blanket, brother.
All right. No problem. They certainly did.
But I will say one thing, though.
All right. Excellent.
I personally took part in the coronavirus vaccine study. And I took it because I personally wanted to be effective and safe for all people, but it must have minority participation for it to do what it needs to do for us. Earlier, Dean Brown had mentioned that even those with diabetes, some have a problem eating with sodium, etc. And my dad was a diabetic. And he said to me one day, you know, all the things that I like to eat seem to be a problem. I said, Dad, because you eat so much of it. Just cut back and watch your diet like your doctor said. I think you'll do better. And what people need to do is follow the lead or follow the instruction of their doctor and take charge of their health. And I think they'll do better.
Excellent. Dean Brown, I normally do not take the deep dive in my guest's resume and their vitas, and needless to say, anyone on the Yale Medical School staff, faculty, everyone is accomplished. But in terms of the research element, I'm going to try to, this is kind of a trivia test. It's kind of test whether you have Alzheimer's or whether your mind is working well. In 2002, but I want to ask this question. In 2002, the American Federation for Clinical Research Outstanding Investigator Award. This is in 2002. Rumor has it it's 2020, now soon to be 2021. Do you recall why you received that award in 2002?
I didn't recall that I did receive, no, just kidding. You know, I think it was related to clinical research in high blood pressure, and particularly understanding how specific drugs worked. There was a group of drugs called, is a group of drugs called angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors. How's that for a mouthful? They're all the drugs that end with pril, lisinopril, enalapril. It's a common group of blood pressure drugs. And there was a new class of drugs that was closely related, and we sorted out the differences between these two classes of drugs. We were also really interested in a side effect of these. So the ACE inhibitors protect the kidney, they reduce heart disease. And interestingly, in patients of African descent, they are more likely to cause a side effect that's swelling. It can be of the tongue or it can be of the lip, and it's very rare, but when it happens, it can block the airway. And we were the first to report that was more common in patients of African descent, and we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what it is, whether there's a genetic factor, and there have now been some other drugs that affect the same pathways, some of the diabetes drugs and some of the newer heart failure drugs. So these are a couple of things that we studied and for which we received awards.
And I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I'm not trying to put you
Yes.
pass it. Did she pass the trivia test, everybody? I think she passed. I think she passed. You can have it. You can stay on your job for another day or two.
Good.
But for people to see that the science is a discovery process, and that there's, as we speak right now, how many people do you supervise? Do you manage? As dean?
Well, the truth is none. They all manage me.
Yes. How many people? 2,000 people manage you? You have.
Something like that. We've got about 1,600 faculty, and then we've got students and fellows.
Indeed, and these are people in research and discovery and in the labs.
Yeah.
And so we cannot take for granted, as we speak right now at 11:37, people are in the midst of how do we make our lives happier, safer, healthier. It might be something really minuscule. It might be something from microbiology. I mean, you majored in highfalutin scientific majors when you were an undergrad at Yale. I can't even pronounce the words, but it's important for people to know that this is an ongoing process. I want to jump to 2018. You received the Robert H. Williams Distinguished Chair of Medicine Award, and I normally don't pick on my guests in this way, but it's important for people to know that there's a brain power here, and that you were selected not for this was not a random choice. Your predecessor had been at the dean of the medical school for, I believe, 16 years.
Yep.
16 years, and this was a global search for who's going to be the next dean of the Yale Medical School. The Yale Medical School is one of the leading global medicine schools in the world. So, you did pay me a lot to kind of be your chief spokesperson. So I just want to kind of earn the money that you gave me under the cover. But the Robert H. Williams Distinguished Chair of Medicine Award, what was that all about?
So that is an award given by all the chairs of medicine in the country to each year to a chair of medicine that they think, whom they think runs a good department of medicine and is a decent chair of medicine. I want to actually slightly get to where I think this should go, which is my parents were each the first in their family to receive a college education. And so when I was growing up, I received loud and clear the message that an education was a valuable thing. And I say that because I know Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton have been very involved in promoting education in the community. And, it's easy to look back at somebody's resume and see these things, but I can assure you that when I was starting out, I had no idea what the heck I was doing. And I was fortunate to have mentors along the way who helped move me forward. So, I think that, I don't know who's listening, but if there's a young person out there who's listening, who's thinking about education and trying to imagine where he or she is going, let me just say, you can do it, and you need to find a mentor.
And your ESP is kicking in. Actually, that was the method to my madness, because we do have a lot of young people that listen to the show, and they're not sure what their destiny is going to look like, not sure what their future is going to look like, but to be inspired and to really just understand what you just mentioned. That was really kind of the method to my madness. On that note, while you were at Vanderbilt, you were very, very much involved with mentorship programs, and I believe also now currently. Is that correct?
Yes. I was, and I mentioned this, the importance of physician scientists. I was involved in establishing an infrastructure to help mentor our physician scientists. It's hard. It's a hard, to juggle writing grants to get funding for your research along with your clinical work, and for our young people with families and all the other things that are part of life. That's hard, and so you need good support. And I think academic medicine in the past was a little bit of a sink or swim kind of place, and we're now starting to appreciate that that's foolish, that we waste a lot of talent, and that if we just mentor and focus on people's development, we'll make a lot of progress. And so it's something near and dear to my heart.
Excellent. And just lastly, Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton and Tisha, let's open it up for the next 20 minutes or so. But lastly, one other question I had for you, Dean Brown, was you and Keith had a chance to kind of work together a long time down there at Vanderbilt.
Yes.
What's the story there? I mean, is there a pipeline? Is there something we should know about Vanderbilt and the connection of us?
Well,
people from
the Churchwell family are kind of Nashville aristocrats. I don't know if you're aware, but Keith's father was the first African-American reporter at the Nashville Banner. And there's a display in his honor at the Smithsonian Museum. And they also are all really fine dressers, and all the brothers in that family, and have been featured in national magazines. And I sort of feel a little frumpy when I'm around Keith or his brother Andre, but it's okay.
But you work together with them down at Vanderbilt too.
Yeah, so Keith, of course, is a cardiologist, as is his brother Andre, and then Keith's twin brother Kevin is the head of the Children's Hospital in Boston. So they have another brother and a sister, and a very distinguished family. Excellent.
Tisha, Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, let's kind of freelance for the next 20 or so minutes, and let's talk about why we're here this morning. It's so critical, particularly, as I say, before tomorrow, and just in terms of health being we know from every aspect, the economy of health impacting world economy, the domestic economy, our personal health, our psychic health, our political health. Let's kind of weigh in a little bit about, let's take advantage of these next 15 or 20 minutes.
I'd like to say that what the dean mentioned about the centropearls that sometimes affect African Americans with the swelling of the lip, and I'm often concerned about that, and I'm concerned because maybe there were not enough African Americans in these early studies that would point to this, and that's a concern. And the mere fact that our community doesn't get the information. I mean, so one person may get it. If it had not been for Facebook or some other forms of social media, it might not even be out there. So I just think that that's one important reason why we should look at research carefully and seriously. And then secondly, I think what the dean said about youth and, almost like follow your dreams because you never know where they're gonna lead you to. Well, one of the things that we've talked to the dean about was this passageway to help young people find a career in medicine. So what we've done with the ambassadors is we started somewhere out of that conversation, our young ambassadors. So they will get the training. They will learn something about, and we can learn something from them. And also they can be part of our outreach into the community.
It's 11:45.
That's right.
When we were thinking about doing the COVID thing, we were looking at people our age. And then even with the flu, we're looking at people our age. But now we got some young ambassadors who can look at people their age. I wish I could be where my daughter is now. Oh my God, I wasted so many years. But now we can take some young people and maybe we can change the way young people are looking at their health. And maybe they can, I don't know how many young people, how many programs we can talk about that will say to young people, you need to get the flu shot. But how do we convince them? How do we reach them? So we reach them through the church, but I think the best way to reach them is have their peers reach out to them. And I think that's what we're doing. So we're learning and with the cultural ambassadors, and we're growing. We're trying to get a template so that what we do here, others can do other places. And then not only will we do it here and make it great, but it'll be not only our neighborhood, but every neighborhood who touches our neighborhood.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Tom, just to add to that, I think one of the most exciting things about the ambassadors program is that the ambassadors are constantly pushing us to be better. They're constantly coming up with new ideas to reach the community, to get the message out, and not only to get the message out, but modifying the message in a way that helps the community understand it, meeting them where they are. And so I think that that's a really important concept that has come from the ambassadors program, thinking about it from the context of how do we break through that barrier. When you say the word clinical research, so many people immediately go to the thought of guinea pig. And I think with the ambassadors, one of the things that they've been able to do is break through that barrier so that when you say clinical research, you think about the message that Reverend Perry and Reverend Clayton are carrying, which is the only way to get the answers to these questions. So to find out that there's a difference in a side effect of a particular therapy because there were enough minorities participating in the study to understand that there are differences, just that information is something that wouldn't have happened decades ago. And so being able to really have the willingness, I would say, of the community to be open to the knowledge, open to considering clinical research participation really comes from the fact that the ambassadors are constantly innovating and helping us think of new ways to reach the community, which I think has just been, it's not only been remarkable in the sense of the changes that have happened here at Yale, increasing the total number of participants in all of our clinical trials, but the diverse participation in clinical trials, but really having that national recognition by the FDA and by others that this is such an important model or template, as Reverend Perry said, I think it's just been phenomenal. And it's been a lot of fun to be a part of. And I think Dean Brown can attest to that. I think she's having just as much fun as I am with all of the conversations with the ambassadors and how much they do and how much we admire them and respect what they have been able to accomplish. It's been incredible.
Tisha, just share again if someone wants to kind of find out about the research and YCCI and where it's kind of very easy for them to collect that information.
Yeah, our website is the yalestudies.org, and you can click there and you can build a profile for help us discover if you happen to be a patient within the Yale system. If you have MyChart, which is the patient portal that you can schedule a visit or get your lab results right there. You can also participate. You can click a link and you can tell us what you'd like to hear about for research. You can volunteer for the available clinical studies. So we really try to make it very easy for anyone who wants to participate in clinical trials.
Excellent.
Or get more information.
Indeed. Reverend Perry, you were going to say something?
No, I want to teach you just to mention about the Connecticut now has the community health worker certification, and that is unique to us because it is now a license. And 10 of our ambassadors have already taken the training and now are waiting on certification. I think that's just an important part of how we're evolving as ambassadors.
That's just another example. I think, the ambassadors came to us and said, we want to extend our knowledge. We want to have this additional certification, and would Yale partner with us? And so we did partner. And as Reverend Perry said, 10 of the ambassadors have the training, have been able to complete the certification course. And with all of the training that they've had, Reverend Clayton and Reverend Perry are very humble, but as part of the original group that partnered with us, they've had well over 200 hours of clinical research training. And so all of that goes to helping not only to carry the message, but these additional certifications, this additional knowledge. They're always, again, I can't say enough, they're always pushing us to learn more, to understand more, and it's just an exciting, it's exciting to be a part of that.
Excellent. Dean Brown, and again, I normally don't go to the history of my guests as much, but I'm stimulated to ask the question. You came to, did you spend 4 years at Yale or did you transfer?
No, I spent 4 years here.
So,
Yeah.
so you came around 78.
Yep, 77, fall of 77. Yeah.
Fall of 77. And women, it had been just a little over 10 years that women had even been admitted to Yale prior to that. I mean, 69, I believe.
69, yeah.
69. So people kind of forget that history changes, things change for a variety of reasons. But you were you were in the early class to be a woman at Yale. And then you reference your parents.
Yep.
We're not college graduates. So
No,
people,
they were first in their families to graduate from college.
they were the first.
Yeah.
And then you follow. So I guess when I pose that kind of really very open-ended question to you, what comes to your mind when I guess make you think about those years and that time? Your parents, you're being a freshman here in 77.
Yeah. Well, I think several things. One is the importance of taking advantage of opportunities when they're granted to you. And the other is, I think in these times, sometimes we get discouraged and we don't think we've made progress. But in fact, we've made a lot of progress in our
Indeed.
society. And I don't think I could have imagined where we would be today, and yet we have so much more to do, right? And if having open dialogue is a first step, among our own, for example, in the School of Medicine, some very frank and open dialogues about racism and exposure of our students and our faculty, sometimes in the hospital, sometimes we just don't appreciate. And I, as a woman in medicine, I can't tell you how many times I was mistaken for, something other than a physician. And so being able to have those conversations, I think, is really important. And the kinds of mentorship and career development we talked about can have a huge impact for those who are underrepresented in the field. So I guess I tend to be an optimist and believe that we can continue to make change as we go forward.
Excellent. We have about another 6 minutes, but Reverend Dean Brown, I guess I wanted to follow up. So this phrase that I'm hoping is not a fad about racism being a public health crisis, that doesn't necessarily surprise you, or racism being a public health issue. Are you pleased? That's kind of a sardonic way of saying, are you pleased with this phrase? But there is seem to be more consumer attention. Various municipalities, various states have kind of passed resolutions to how to deal with the issue. And the catchphrase has been racism is a public health issue, a public health crisis. How do you relate to that?
Yeah, so I think it's been very helpful to spur a dialogue. I'm always afraid, phrases always worry me, because I think it's easy to spout phrases, but not to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work, as I was talking about with COVID. And so, we have to be engaged for the long haul here. We have lots of change to do. And we also have to, I think, embrace science, getting back to our theme, by which I mean, there's a lot of anti-science rhetoric. And I think sometimes, whether it's anti-vaccine or, that can be confused. I think we can get racism confused with other things sometimes. And I want to make sure that we're taking an agnostic approach and we're thinking about a scientific approach to how we solve problems. I think it's great for spurring dialogue, but I really want us to have that difficult conversations.
Excellent. Everyone, we have about another three or so minutes, and Harry will play the music, and it'll be our way of kicking us off. And if we don't stop talking, he'll just go to another program that starts following this one. So I just want to get my thank yous in now. But Dean Brown, I want to kind of follow up on what you just mentioned. Structurally, I've heard, I'm kind of in the news business, as you can well imagine. One might say a rumor chaser. So I have heard discussions about some of the management style, your particular management style, some of your hopes in terms of the climate and the service delivery, not only at the health system, but also in terms of medical school education. So this is kind of a softball question that I have heard that some of the changes that you are attempting to institute to really make it more of a, as you say, not only friendly, but effective, but also a community-driven institution. Any last words in that regard?
I think we're in the business of developing people, and everything we do, whether it's medical education or science, is for the benefit of people, and that's all people, and we need to invest in people.
Excellent. Tisha, Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, any last words? And investing in people and getting a return on our investment, absolutely, that's the key, and increasing the return of the investment.
Just very grateful.
Well, that's it, guys. Dean Brown, thank you so much. Tomorrow's a key day. Let's have health after tomorrow. Tisha, Reverend Perry, Reverend Clayton, Dean Brown, thank you so much for joining us. And again, this is the Tom Ficklin Show. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank
Ready
you.
for your final version. I'm never gonna give up, fall down. I
This
just
is
gotta
Harry
get up,
Groves, and you're listening to WNHHLP 103.5 FM New Haven.
I'm never gonna give up.